We begin tonight with day 13 of the 12-day war, also known as day 1 of peace. The big question, will there be a day 2? Good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Vargas. At this moment, President Trump is in the Netherlands for the NATO summit, 19 hours after the ceasefire he brokered between Israel and Iran took effect. It's holding for now. Both sides are promising to stop the fighting as long as the other side doesn't attack. Now, 19 hours might not sound significant, but considering that the ceasefire nearly collapsed just minutes after it started early this morning, it's a good sign. What happens next may depend on Iran's nuclear ambitions. And according to President Trump, those ambitions are now buried under a mountain of rubble.
Iran will never rebuild its nucleus. From there? Absolutely not. That place is under rock. That place is demolished. The B-2 pilots did their job. They did it better than anybody could even imagine. They hit late in the evening. It was dark with no moon, and they hit that target with every one of those things, and that place is gone.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu echoed that sentiment today. In an address to his nation, he claimed, quote, a historic victory over Iran, boasting that the 12-day war brought Iran's nuclear program to ruin. But every side in war tries to promote its own victory narrative, and they often deviate from the facts on the ground. And that might be the case here. The U.S. intelligence agency, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, has reportedly made a much more modest battle damage assessment. Officials told the Associated Press and the New York Times that America's bunker-busting bombs only delayed Iran's nuclear program by a few months. And according to those reports, U.S. bombs sealed off entrances to 2 nuclear facilities, but did not destroy their underground operations. The White House and the Defense Secretary furiously pushed back on those reports. In a statement to NewsNation, Secretary Hegseth said, quote, based on everything we have seen, and I've seen it all, our bombing campaign obliterated Iran's ability to create nuclear weapons. Our massive bombs hit exactly the right spot at each target and worked perfectly. He went on, the impact of those bombs is buried under a mountain of rubble in Iran. So anyone who says the bombs were not devastating is just trying to undermine the president and his successful mission. We have live team coverage tonight. NewsNation's Joe Khalil is live at the White House, and Robert Sherman is in Tel Aviv. We begin with Joe Khalil. Joe, this is big pushback to anything that undercuts President Trump's triumphant claims. And this comes as those congressional intelligence briefings were canceled today and pushed back to later this week.
It is, Elizabeth. It's a stark difference from what we've been hearing from President Trump and several other administration officials. You saw that Secretary Pete Hegseth pushed back. Actually, the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, pushed back even more aggressively than that. She said that the leak of the alleged assessment is a clear attempt at demeaning President Trump. She said that everybody knows what happens when you drop 14, 30,000-pound bombs onto a target, total obliteration. If the DIA report is accurate, Elizabeth, this is not just he said, she said. This would have serious consequences and repercussions for the region, for the world, for all of our allies, if Iran's capability is not totally destroyed, but rather just delayed for a couple of months. So there's going to be a lot more digging into it. And to your point, that is partly why a lot of Democrats were really angry today that they didn't get a scheduled briefing from the administration and the national security folks. They say they want to see the intelligence. They want to know where the enriched uranium from Iran is, and they want to know what the U.S. knows about these strikes. They say they should have gotten that briefing even before they happened. So there is some bad blood there as well. President Trump today, as you mentioned, that ceasefire that he put so much into is holding for now. But overnight, last night, it certainly was not. And he was really visibly angry. More exceptionally, what we saw was a president that was raw and real and sort of exasperated, not even as much at our adversary Iran, but more so at our ally in Israel. He was, per our reporting, having to really urge Prime Minister Netanyahu today in a more aggressive way to stop the bombing campaign. Take a listen to what he said. And again, I would argue this is maybe the most exceptionally real that we have seen President Trump in front of cameras since he's been president.
You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
So relatively more measured later on in the day, Elizabeth, as he was on his way to the NATO summit, where the Israel and Iran situation certainly is going to be top of mind, as is the Russia-Ukraine situation. We expect President Trump may very well have a sideline meeting with President Zelensky, possibly tomorrow. But all of this unfolding, the White House keeping a very keen eye on what happens in the Middle East.
All right, Joe Khalil, thank you. Now we go to Tel Aviv, where NewsNation's Robert Sherman is, following the latest developments. Robert, the IDF says its focus is now shifting back to Gaza, but it's also saying its campaign against Iran isn't over.
Yeah, that's right, Elizabeth. As the prime minister claims victory here in this war against Iran, he also made very clear to the public tonight that Israel still faces threats in the region. There are still well-armed proxies that wish to do harm, and there are still hostages in Gaza. This was his message to the public tonight.
But despite our remarkable achievements, we are not carried away by euphoria. We are not arrogant. We are not complacent. On the contrary, we have no intention of easing up. We must complete the campaign against the Iranian axis, defeat Hamas, and bring about the release of all of our hostages, the living and the fallen alike.
On the Gaza front, Qatar says that they want to restart those talks with Israel in a matter of days. But tonight there is reprieve on the ground here in Israel, even if it's short-lived, as the Home Front Command has lifted restrictions here in the country, meaning people can go back to the beach, people can go back to school, which is a far cry from where we were just a couple of hours ago when Israel was operating at its highest level of alertness and people were told not to be leaving their homes. Adding to that, the airport saying today that they're hoping to resume commercial flights, particularly to foreigners, in a matter of a couple of days. We've already seen some repatriation flights restarting on the ground here in Israel. So there is hope that we will inch closer to normalcy here in the region, but there's also widespread understanding on the ground here in Israel that there's more work still to be done. Elizabeth?
Yeah, Reuters and the Times of Israel both reporting that Ben Gurion Airport is opening for commercial air traffic tonight. So that is going to be great news for the folks stranded in Israel. Robert Sherman, thank you. Joining me now live is former IDF spokesman Jonathan Conricus. He's a senior fellow for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, great to have you back. So Prime Minister Netanyahu celebrated Israel's, quote, historic victory in its war against Iran. He went on to claim that Iran's nuclear program is useless now. But there are these reports, this preliminary U.S. intelligence assessment showing that Iran's only been set back a few months. Is that success?
Well, I think Israel in this case has been very successful because what those leaked reports, again, anonymous people who are leaking things that have, I think, an obvious political spin to it. But I'll leave that for U.S. people to talk about. When I look at, Iran's nuclear weapons program, we have to look at it holistically and broadly. Not only does Iran not have any of its former facilities intact, not Fordo, not Isfahan, not Natanz, not Arak. None of the important facilities are intact. All of them were hit. We'll still have to see how severely Fordo was hit, but all of the others were hit very severely, and the Atomic Agency has said that. But in addition to that, the masterminds of the Iranian weapons program, 11 super important scientists, are no longer alive, and they are no longer going to be developing weapons at the behest of the Iranian regime. That is decades of knowledge, perhaps even centuries of knowledge and management and experience that are not existent and not attainable anymore. In addition to that, equipment. Israel has been able to strike most of the cascades and the centrifuges and other key components of infrastructure that used to be part of the Iranian nuclear weapons program, but are not anymore. So I think we have to be, it is very tempting to listen to some parts of a report that were leaked for obvious political aims, but we have to look at this holistically. And I think the conservative assessment would be that severe damage has been caused the Iranian weapons program. Perhaps it will take them months, perhaps years. I think it's too early to say. But if I'm an Iranian nuclear or a weapons guy, I'm not happy today because most of those tools have been either destroyed or severely damaged.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that the Defense Intelligence Agency is just one of several U.S. intelligence agencies. This is only a preliminary intelligence report from one of our defense intelligence agencies. But there are reports that Israeli intelligence is also showing that the underground facilities at Fordo were not destroyed. Israeli intelligence also believes that Iran has secret enrichment sites around the country. That's something that our former Secretary of State said that the U.S. intelligence has long believed. So that raises the question of what exactly the status is of Iran's nuclear program. Destroying it was the primary reason for the attack. And is it successful if Iran still has facilities that are capable of operating and still has nearly 900 pounds of enriched uranium that is now disappeared?
I don't think it has. And again, Elizabeth, I think we should be more cautious when we rely on all kinds of anonymous sources and leaks that are reflected in the media. The issue of enriched material, I've heard solid intel assessments that state exactly the opposite, that the overwhelming majority of that enriched material, almost military-grade enriched uranium, was in fact destroyed, or it is buried under the rubble in Fordo. And one of the reasons why Israel attacked Fordo after the U.S. B-2 bomber strike was to sever the capacity of the Iranians to salvage anything. And I think, in all fairness, if anything should be clear from 12 days of fighting is that Israel had impeccable intel when it comes to who was doing what, where the Iranians were doing it, and who was behind it, who was financing it, and where everything was. And I think a bit of humility for people who are, fast to claim non-success, I think for political reasons, whether it's grudges against President Trump or issues against Netanyahu.
No, I think that, listen, the head of the IAEA said that 880 pounds of enriched uranium is missing. Vice President Vance, last night in an interview, did not dispute that. In fact, he said it's, quote, mission success, even if Iran still has its uranium but doesn't have any way to enrich it. Does Israel consider that a success? Is Israel safe if Iran still has this uranium and potential secret enrichment sites?
Yeah, it may be missing for the atomic agency. I'm not entirely sure that it's missing from Israeli intelligence. And again, time will tell. Regarding Israeli safety, I think that Israel isn't safe as long as the Iranian regime exists. That is, I think, a real fundamental question that we have to be discussing. And where we go from here, will the Iranian regime agree and actually concede defeat here and say, okay, we're not going to try to continue to develop nuclear weapons. We're going to stop with that and, focus on prosperity in the future of our country? Or are they going to cling to that and possibly blow this up, and escalate the conflict once again? That is a very important question. I think time will tell how much of their program was destroyed, how much was set back, how much is salvageable. But at the end of the day, safety and stability in the Middle East, now the ball is very much in the Iranian court. They'll have the opportunity to either choose no nuclear weapons program and perhaps easing of sanctions and perhaps positive things for the future of the republic and for the people, or a different reality.
Jonathan Conricus, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
All right, let's go now to our panel. Geraldo Rivera is a NewsNation correspondent at large, and retired four-star General Philip Breedlove is a former NATO allied Supreme Allied Commander. Great to have both of you here. General, I just want to ask you about these reports that there's preliminary U.S. intelligence from the Defense Department showing the massive bunker buster bombs did not destroy these underground facilities at Fordo. How is that even possible? These bombs are massive.
Well, thanks for having me on, and it's awesome to be on with Geraldo. But I will just tell you that it's still early in the process of looking at all of this. We are really grasping at sort of early findings, and they may be right, they may be wrong, but there are some things that are factual. The best minds in the world went into the weaponeering of this attack, and the best Air Force in the world delivered in a way that was demonstrative. We call these things DIMPs, designated mean points of impact. They hit their DIMPs precisely. The weapons were in the right parameters when they hit them, meaning approach angles and all of those things. We should expect success, but that doesn't necessarily mean perfect success.
And General, Geraldo, I'm going to get to you in a second, but General, what is this early Defense Department intelligence basing this assessment on? No one's been on the ground yet to see for themselves. How often do these preliminary assessments change?
Well, we're going to see a lot of movement in what we determine about this over the next days and weeks. This is very early in the process. And what they're looking at is sort of what I talked about. Did we hit what we aimed at? Did we hit it in the way we wanted to hit it, et cetera, et cetera? Then they're looking at the patterns of spalling and rubble, and we will in the future begin to sniff to see if there are any leaks that are out there. There are a lot of things that have to come to play yet. Okay. I'm not saying that what DIA said is not right, but I'm just saying it's early.
It's early. Geraldo, Vice President Vance has been very careful from the moment these attacks happened not to say publicly that these nuclear sites were obliterated. He did not go as far as President Trump. He is now saying that this will be a success, this mission, even if Iran still has 880 pounds of uranium, as long as they don't have a way to enrich it further. Is he right, or is he moving the goalposts?
Well, excellent point. I think that I would not like 880 pounds of highly enriched uranium, in the hands of someone who can put it in a bunch of suitcases and take it to Grand Central Station, and then set it off with a flare or something. I don't know, I'm not a high-tech person. All I can tell you is looking at the puncture holes that the bunker busters left, and exactly as General Breedlove says, where they wanted to put them. It's hard to believe that thing, they're punctured. They're not like, I'll keep going on the graphics. You'll see one where it has 3 holes in the top. They're pinholes. That bunker buster went in, did not explode until it was where it was supposed to be, and the surface is almost look at that. Imagine I didn't know what it would look like. I've never seen the bunker buster used before. To me, it is inconceivable, Elizabeth, that this damage isn't extremely severe. That their program, if it hasn't been, melted, is set back. Maybe they have no means of weaponizing the uranium they still have. I don't know about that. All I know is that, look at that. How would you like to be 50 feet under and have that thing come and visit you and blow the chamber up? I can't imagine the centrifuges surviving.
That's why these reports of this assessment are so shocking, that this many powerful bombs could be dropped down, burrow down in there and explode, and only set back the Iranian program a few months. If this is true, it's incredible. In the meantime, what you cannot argue or debate is the fact that we are 19 plus hours into a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. And it is holding, despite the fact that minutes after President Trump announced it, it appeared to almost blow up. Trump lost his temper. He did blow up, really angry, but managed to convince everybody to pull back from the ledge. What is your main concern looking forward about this ceasefire holding and all the very belligerent rhetoric we're still hearing from the Iranians?
Well, I think that what happened in Beersheba was a tragedy. The 4 or 5 people killed after the ceasefire was announced. But that was, I think, just one of those things, one of the accidents of war. And I'm glad that the ceasefire is holding so far. My worry is that either Netanyahu or the Ayatollah will succumb to the most militant in their crew and try to do something sneaky that violates the terms of the ceasefire. What I would do if I was the Ayatollah, I'd get 1,000 guys with shovels. Okay, let's dig this hole out and let's see if there's anything in there, and we'll have the world look with us as we dig the hole. I think that you've got to end what you got to end. Right now, I want more than anything in my whole life to have Gaza end. Finally have Gaza, peace in Gaza. Hamas should be sent to Doha to spend the rest of their lives on the beach if they want. Get them out of there, get the hostages, rescue these hostages, end this crisis so you can deal with the Middle East in a sober way that makes sense for the people, rather than just swapping wars and missiles and this and that and bunker busters and it's enough.
General,
basta.
Basta. Are American troops in the Middle East, 40,000 of them, still on high alert, even given that this ceasefire is only 19 hours old, or will that be easing a bit?
You bet they're still on alert. There will be a tailored drawdown from some of the most tough parts of the alert, but we're going to be watching how the two protagonists go at this. There is still damage that could be done, but there is sort of a large hammer hanging over Iran. Remember that Israel established complete air superiority over the western part of Iran, and we're just hammering their military. And they know that the West could do this all over again. So hopefully sound minds and quieter minds will come to the fore now, and we'll move to a better place.
Geraldo Rivera and General Philip Breedlove agreeing on a note of hope. We'll end it there. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, General.
All right, coming up for us, satellite images do show trucks were lined up at the Fordo nuclear plant the day before America's strike on that facility. Now, the IAEA says Iran moved all its enriched uranium to secret sites. What does that mean for Iran's nuclear ambitions? And then later, stranded in the Middle East combat zone? Time to call these guys. They just got 200 Americans out of Israel the hard way. That daring rescue straight ahead.
Bill O'Reilly on Cuomo.
What are you talking about? Here's what I'm talking about, Cuomo.
America's favorite sparring duo with TV's liveliest, most honest debate.
I just tell you the truth backed up by facts.
Tomorrow at 8, 7 Central, only on NewsNation.
If the ceasefire holds and if Iran agrees to a nuclear deal, then Operation Midnight Hammer will be remembered as a smashing success. But remember, the original mission objective was to destroy Iran's nuclear program once and for all, deal or no deal. And we said earlier, President Trump, never one for rhetorical restraint, has said that the mission resulted in the complete obliteration of the Iranian nuclear threat.
They're not going to have enrichment, and they're not going to have a nuclear weapon, and they know that. The last thing on Iran's mind right now is nuclear weapons.
But aside from those assessments that we only moderately damaged the sites in Iran, there are also reports that 880 pounds of enriched uranium are now reportedly missing in Iran. That would be uranium that's enriched to 60%, close to what's needed to make a bomb. The IAEA says Iran moved the uranium to a safe, secret place before the strikes occurred. And while satellite pictures show the smoking gashes after the U.S. dropped bombs on the Fordo nuclear site, some experts believe the enriched uranium wasn't even stored in Fordo anyway, but rather in tunnels near Isfahan, which appeared not to have been destroyed. My next guest is one of those people. Jeffrey Lewis is an expert in nuclear nonproliferation. He's also a professor at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies. Great to have you here. So you've said Iran's capabilities are damaged but not gone. What do you mean? Does this mean they can still build a nuclear weapon?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've seen that the Defense Intelligence estimate is that the program has been set back by, at worst, 1 to 2 months, at best a year. And that's basically consistent with the damage we see. You know, the strikes have been very impressive in the sense that they have damaged a large number of Iranian facilities. But this was a very big program, and there are a lot of facilities that simply weren't hit. So Iran still has the ability to make centrifuges. They still have at least one facility where they can install centrifuges to enrich uranium. And then there's that 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium that no one seems to know where it is.
Yeah. The head of the IAEA says Iran told him they were going to move it in advance of the American military strikes. Satellite images do show lines of trucks going into and out of the sites. Where would Iran hide 880 pounds of enriched uranium?
Well, the public reporting on the Defense Intelligence Agency estimate is that they moved it to one of the many secret sites that they have. You know, we at the James Martin Center, we look at lots of locations around Iran, and there are many, many, many underground sites where Iran could have put that material. So, you know, I don't think we know exactly where it is, but they don't exactly have a shortage of underground tunnels.
So even with the uranium, they still need a way to enrich it further. It's only at 60% reportedly. Doesn't it need to be higher to make a bomb?
It does. And that's one of the things that's very concerning about the planning that went into these strikes, because you know, the day before the strikes began, Iran announced that it had a new third enrichment site. They said they had not yet installed any centrifuges, but they were going to begin any day. And that site has not been struck, as best I can tell. So, you know, it's not the sites you strike, right? It's the ones you miss.
Right. What do you make of these assessments by not just U.S. intelligence, but Israeli intelligence, that they, as much as Iran was cooperating, in air quotes, with the IAEA and the international community by allowing inspectors to come in periodically, that they were at the same time secretly developing other secret sites that might have working centrifuges?
Well, it is important to say that for this additional site, Iran did declare it to the IAEA. That's how we know about it, is they had invited the IAEA to look at it. But, you know, the Iranians have been gradually reducing their cooperation with the IAEA ever since the United States abandoned the nuclear deal. And that has now gotten to a point where it is a very serious problem. And the IAEA Board of Governors found that Iran was in violation of its safeguards agreement. So, you know, I think the Iranians had some misguided notion that if they were obstreperous and they continued to reduce their cooperation, that, you know, they would get what they wanted. I don't think the strike has been successful in destroying their capabilities, but I also can't imagine this is what they wanted.
Yeah, and there's also the concern that they'll just take whatever they were managed to save and salvage and go underground a la North Korea and do it all secretly and quit all cooperation of any kind.
I mean, I very much worry about that. Some Iranian officials have even made threats against the life of the head of the IAEA, who I think is a very fine director general and a very fair man. And so I think Iran really is coming up to a decision point. You know, the Trump administration has claimed that this bombing is going to cause the Iranians to come back to the table chastened and better behaved. I don't know about that. I don't normally bet on that kind of thing in life, but I suppose we're going to find out.
Let's hope so. Jeffrey Lewis, sobering analysis there. Thank you. It
was a pleasure.
Coming up for us, what does the word peace really mean to the world's top sponsor of terrorism? Should Americans be bracing for sleeper cell attacks or cyber attacks? A cyber attack on the president's social media platform may be a sign of things to come. We're going to get into that next. All right, at this hour, the ceasefire between Israel and Iran appears to be holding, but do remember who we're dealing with here. Iran, one of the world's least trustworthy and most unscrupulous regimes. And even if the mullahs of Iran agree not to launch any more missiles for the time being, they might still retaliate against the United States in other indirect ways. The Department of Homeland Security is warning of the potential for low-level cyber attacks carried out by pro-Iranian hackers. And we're not just talking about hacking your phone or shutting down the internet. We're talking about the regime targeting vital infrastructure. In the last several years, it has targeted U.S. banks, hospitals, water facilities, all with varying levels of success. And just yesterday, Iranian-aligned hackers claimed responsibility for a cyber attack on President Trump's Truth Social platform. And of course, there's still the threat of the analog age terrorism, bombings, shootings, cars and vehicles plowing through crowds. Customs and Border Protection says the threat of sleeper cells in the United States has never been higher. So how worried should Americans be? Joining us now is Jonathan Schanzer. He's the executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He's also a former terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Great to have you with us. So I'm curious, would Iran risk attacking the United States right now in any capacity, cyber or those analog examples or using sleeper cells? Would it risk inviting another massive attack from President Trump?
Look, I think it would be suicide for the regime to do it, but I think they are undoubtedly probing, right? I mean, we put them directly in the crosshairs, and I think they're probably thinking about how they can exact their revenge. We need to remember that this is the regime that is the state sponsor of Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, about 12 different Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria. They're all terrorist groups. But it's even worse than that, because the Iranian regime also, if you go back and you look at the 9/11 Commission report, you'll see that Iran was actually involved with Al-Qaeda, providing some measure of support to a Sunni jihadist group. You'd think that Al-Qaeda and Iran maybe wouldn't get along, but here they are. And so they've got all these assets at their disposal, but they're also recruiting young people in Europe, kids, 15, 16, 17 years old, to shoot at the Israeli embassy. They're hiring, criminal gangs to try to carry out assassinations. And they've done that here in this country. So there's a lot of risk here to watch. And of course, the cyber one is the most easy way to do this because it's non-kinetic. Of course, we've got excellent cyber services who are probably inside a lot of their systems right now. But attacks are certainly possible.
Yeah, you mentioned the criminal gangs. There was just that alert and bulletin yesterday from Sweden that a warning that Iran was encouraging criminal gangs in Sweden to target and attack Americans who were traveling there. It raises the question, how much control does the Ayatollah and Iran have over these rogue groups, these sleeper cells?
Right. And I don't think it all tracks back to one man. It's a system that he created, and it's under the watch of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. And these are the most loyal practitioners of the Islamic Revolution. They are the ones who were behind the vast majority of the terrorist attacks. They're the people that were the guards of the nuclear program. They hold the most closely guarded secrets in the regime. And they have created this network. And this network is dangerous because it is so widespread, because it is diffuse, and because there is sometimes deniability. In other words, you get a criminal gang, or you get kids that are recruited off the streets for not even a lot of money, and the Iranians can prompt these things to happen, these terror. They can do some with some deniability, and those are the sorts of things that I'm watching right now.
You mentioned the cyber attacks. That seems to have everybody the most concerned right now. Iran has a very robust cyber terrorism unit that works.
They do, but I have to say that right now I would be shocked if the United States and the Israelis and maybe the Brits and some of the other Western cyber powers are not already inside the Iranian systems. In other words, they call it defending forward, right? They're up in the systems already looking for malign actors that might try to put malicious code into our systems. And I've got to imagine the Israelis in the United States are on high alert for this. They have been, I think, throughout the entire war in Israel, and certainly since the U.S. has decided to enter into the fray, some 12 days ago. I do think that, that they're looking. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't actors that are outside of Iran that are off of our radar, that are off of the Israeli radar. And that's obviously also something to be concerned about. But I think to just put it very bluntly, the Iranians are very good at asymmetric warfare. They've always fought by proxy. They fight all of their enemies by way of someone else, and that keeps them at arm's length.
I can't imagine it wouldn't invite the most furious and ferocious response if they were to launch something like this, and it could be traced back to Iran. Jonathan Schanzer, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, coming up for us, hundreds of Americans were just rescued from the Middle East during a missile strike. It was actually while missiles were flying. I'm going to speak with a state lawmaker who was with them trying to get out next. All right, you're looking live at Tel Aviv, Israel, where the airspace across the country, there are reports, is finally opening tonight for the first time in almost 2 weeks as this ceasefire brokered by President Trump takes effect. Now, tens of thousands of Americans have been trying to get out of Israel, and many have found it difficult or impossible for the last 12 days. About 200 Americans are safely home tonight, thanks to an organization led by a group of U.S. veterans who rescued their fellow citizens from under missile fire while the airspace was closed. These veterans call themselves Gray Bull Rescue. Their work is not for the faint of heart. In this recent mission, the extraction team spent hours in underground bunkers in Israel as Iranian missiles rained down. And that was the easy part. Next, they embarked on a harrowing journey to bus all those Americans out of harm's way. To date, Gray Bull has received more than 6,000 requests for assistance from Americans in Israel. Florida State Senator Jay Collins, who was also a veteran, joined Gray Bull Rescue on this mission and just returned to the United States. He joins us now. Great to have you here. Tell me what this was like. This sounds like quite an ordeal.
Well, it was quite a journey. First off, thank you for having me on here. And what an incredible opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others, right? Very few times you get an opportunity like this to really make a tangible difference. And you said it, we had the opportunity to duck, dive, dodge some missile fire from the Iranians. We spent some time in the bunkers. We got up, we dusted off, and we continued our mission. We had about 229 of our fellow citizens with us. We got up, pushed up through the border, off to Amman, and brought them back home via a couple other stops, and we just landed a few hours ago in Tampa. And I'll tell you what, man, what an incredible feeling to see just the looks of joy, the tears of joy coming from all of our people we rescued. An absolute blessing to do that with our friends and family around us.
Tell me about that. How these folks have really spent the last 12 days on edge, many of them desperate to get out, so many unable to. What were they terrified during that ordeal when you were in the bunker and you were driving to the border? You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, this was definitely something that put them out of their comfort zone. Yeah, as a retired Green Beret, I've been to combat before. I'm not afraid of being in a combat zone. And I thought, if you're going to jump into this, what would I want someone to do if my family were there and I couldn't go forward to do this? Somebody's got to step up. Someone's got to protect and preserve the people we care about. That's our community. So we acted. And they were very afraid of the kinetic aspect of the missiles. The hypersonic, supersonics are so fast, so violent. But in the end, they wanted to get home. They wanted to see their family, and that was the focus. And we were able to partner with them to get them home.
Israel, apparently, according to reports, is tonight opening up the skies to air travel, civilian air travel again. There's an enormous backlog of people waiting to get out. El Al is adding flights to try and deal with the demand, but I think Gray Bull is still getting requests for help getting out.
Yeah, no, they absolutely are. When I got home a little bit earlier today, we still had several thousand people on our list. and we're communicating to them, seeing what they want to do, how that's going to work. And, I had the opportunity to work with Gray Bull Rescue, but I was there with the state of Florida. This is the state of Florida acting along with a nonprofit, that public-private partnership to make a difference. I think it's what we as state leaders should be doing. This fits well under what I believe President Trump wants. State leadership stepping forward in disasters and taking a stand and leading. And proud of Governor DeSantis for doing the right thing and protecting and bringing our citizens home.
Yeah, Governor DeSantis immediately offered to send planes over to bring back Floridians who were stranded over in the Middle East. Florida State Senator Jay Collins, first of all, thank you for your service as a Green Beret, and great to talk to you. I'm glad you're home safe, and all the folks you brought with you are home safe too.
Thank you, Elizabeth. An absolute blessing. Have a good day.
You too. Coming up for us, the ceasefire is holding as we approach the top of the hour. Will it stay that way? Chris Cuomo joins me live next to discuss. All right, it has been an eventful 24 hours in the Middle East and around the world and in news. Chris Cuomo joins me now. Chris, this ceasefire is so fragile. You're going to have some guests on tonight who will play through all the scenarios about how this might all play out.
Look, I mean, I had no expectation that this is what was going to happen.
I don't think anybody did.
I mean, we thought that this was going to be about mission creep, and one thing leads to another, and what's really going on, and where is Congress? And now this has been a positive turn of events. Any kind of ceasefire is better than active bombing. So what happens next, of course, matters, but that doesn't make what has already happened any less valuable in terms of stability. I did not see attacking the regime as getting the regime to want to take a step back. And this was a kind of active deterrence that wound up working for now.
Right. And not only did Iran agree to the ceasefire, it also is leaving open the possibility of negotiations still to come.
Right.
Big caveat, it's Iran.
Yes.
But still, the fact that they're willing to at least go through the motions of coming to the table and negotiating is a huge deal.
Right. And
win
also,
for President Trump.
Also recognition of their weakness. And I don't mean that in terms of dispositionally. I'm saying functionally.
No.
We keep learning the same lesson. Yeah. Russia is the most formidable. We have to build up our military for 3 decades because of the Cold War. They can barely handle what Ukraine is bringing their way. And they're getting help from China and North Korea, right? Ukraine is getting help from us. So Russia wasn't what we thought they were. Iran, the regime, is not what we thought they were. However, there's a big difference. Iran, the regime, can hurt us so many ways, including by encouraging our own self-hatred. And that's something we're talking about tonight.
I know. It's something you've been talking about actually now for several weeks. It'll be a great show, I'm sure. Chris Cuomo, take it away.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.